Every morning, June Ross played an album by the Jazz Quartet Oregon as she sat at the vanity to observe and study herself. She never tired of listening to Oregon, or when the mood moved her, to dance among the rhythms when the combo finally broke free of the rigid, nearly classical architecture they applied to their music. The structure reminded her of her life. It left indelible marks on her soul. When she called Oregon soul music, everyone had laughed. She raised one eyebrow archly. Captivated by the stormy gray of her eyes, June moved closer to inspect the nearly invisible flecks of yellow and brown, fascinated, but only for a moment. She pulled back and studied herself. The vanity mirror was useful. It told no lies. She wasn't getting older. She was old. The bulbs that lined the mirror lit the face of reality. Her face, an old face. She was an artist. With each succeeding year, her art became subtler. The secret to the application of her makeup was to allow age to improve her looks. This hadn't been difficult in her 40s and 50s. She had blossomed at the time with a lushness that surprised and pleased her, as if God had looked down and said, "You shall be comforted in this age by fullness, and you shall be desired more than in your youth." But now God had deserted her. She was on her own. She eliminated the idea of a facelift. She had no interest in looking like an alien. She had the insight to forego the common mistake of pancake makeup. The secret to making old age attractive was to allow it to show, but not too much, nor too quickly. June spent much of her time in low light. The cafe, the bar, the theater. Her own Russian Hill apartment, where Tetley Shaw had designed the lighting to show only her best features. In the mirror she studied her face, first in full brightness, then she dimmed bulb after bulb until she saw a diffident goddess in Twilight, a rainy day beauty, a celebration of maturity. Her hair was one of the few concessions. It was thick, but not too thick. It fell in natural waves, and then curled into gentle ringlets, a burnished brown. The gray would wait until she could no longer deceive, and her wicked enemy overcame. Only then would the gray come into its own richness. As she studied herself, the day ahead of her, the perfect outfit, and the shoes that would nail it, June tumbled into a lifetime of memories. She often thought of the concept of memory itself. Her mind remained sharp, her memories too close. Sometimes she thought Alzheimer's might not be such a bad thing. What am I but a collection of memories? And most of them I'd rather forget anyway. She studied the small smile that this thought brought. She dabbed her index finger in the gritty rose-pink cream and blended a smooth transition from her red lips, gentling the parentheses of lines. She made like a fish and cringed at the brutal vertical lines of her upper lip. She mellowed them with each application of the cream. They never completely disappeared, but left a sexy hint of wisdom. All too often she had read about the horrible, tragic cliché of forgetting a lover's face, or of the child who lost a parent and then as an adult lost the memory of her daddy's looks. This was a technique, a conceit. One never lost the memory of a face. June still vividly remembered Johnny's face when they were both 17. The way his eyes surrounded his beautiful horsey nose, the smell of his hair, slicked with Vitalis. How his motorcycle jacket creaked as he reached to put an arm around her exposed shoulders. The memory so visceral, she could feel the wet cascading. To grow old and to forget, to die before you're dead. She wondered what was so bad about that. To forget, to reinvent, to remake every day. That seemed sexy. She didn't need a crowd of memories to be who she was. June smiled into the mirror. Her mouth was perfect. She arose and twirled to the armoire. Oregon came to a sudden, broken moment. She felt a lifetime of deep stricture melt away, a brim of happiness dancing along the edge of stress. If she forgot Johnny Linkletter's pretty face, then who was she? We are nothing but our memories. If we lose them, then what? It was this descent into bitterness and forgetfulness that frightened the entire world. Johnny Linkletter's clothes lay in a tumble on the rocky incline that jutted out over the quarry. Below, Johnny dog-paddled, his naked form mesmerizing from under the quavering waterline. His black hair slicked against his head as he looked up. Johnny called for June to jump, but she resisted, wanting him to want her just a little more. June heard somebody moving in the woods behind her. She turned and saw blonde Gil Harker smiling widely at her, brash in his flat top and rolled up short-sleeved shirt, his tight dungarees and low-top sneakers. He motioned for her to come. She shook her head. Johnny called for her to jump, and she looked over the quarry's edge with a toothy grin, shaking her head. From the trees, Gil whispered, "June, come here now." At the sound of his command, she felt a sudden tingle, a hollowness in her stomach, a gush. She flushed. Again, she shook her head. June stood naked at the armoire, the doors pulled wide, each with a long mirror on the inside. She drew the long drawer at the bottom open, and there were jumbled treasures of her thrift store hunts. She rummaged until she found what she wanted, the one thing she most needed in these days of plush aging flesh. The slimming girdle hugged reassuringly tight just below her full bosom, molding her, pushing the cheeks of her rump together into a sudden soft plumpness. She faced a mirrored inner door, ran hands over smooth, dwindled waist and flared hips. The girdle hovered just above her mons. She grinned mischievously, thinking how young guys went wild when they undressed her. Couldn't wait to stick their faces under the shielding girdle to lick her. She appraised her nestled rear end. Not bad for an old lady. Arched out from high-heeled perched, it would still devastate the right boy. And it seemed more and more that this was an age when women of a certain age had come of age. She gave her throat a critical gaze. Her faux pearl choker would hide the encroaching wattles, stir the artist's imagination. She had turned her back on Johnny and vanished as he called to her from the cool quarry water. Gil Harker pointed to the ground in front of him in silent command, and she finally obeyed. The gentle pressure of Gil's hand lowered June to her knees. June looked up at the puffy skin around Gil's bruised eyes and felt a terrible, bad excitement. She could hear Johnny splashing as he moved from the water to climb the quarry. He called out to her as he came. "Where are you?" She reassured. "I'm here, Johnny." June arranged Gil back inside his dungarees. She looked up at him, remaining silent. With toneless authority, he said, "Later." Gil moved back into the forest. June had the smell of him inside of her. She turned to answer Johnny's innocent questions with lies. In that summer of her first betrayal, she discovered her style. Summer dresses and bare legs became her lifelong trademark. When she arrived in San Francisco, not yet showing she was carrying a child, she was an immediate hit with the bohemians and beatniks of North Beach. She was like a waft of spring air, trailing through the treeist in her bright floral patterns. Every eye reviewed her and pronounced her audacious. A sophisticated young woman in a black beret and red lipstick hailed her. June's opening repartee shocked and delighted. Like her summer dress, she was quirky and perky. Once June won over their reluctant girlfriends, she was free to do whatever she wanted. Nowadays, no matter what she did, the skin on her legs bunched and stretched, shiny and dry and no longer lustrous, but her calves were still fine and curved. She began wearing stockings in her early 50s and discovered a whole new aphrodisiac. This morning, her stockings were purple. She stepped into a summer frock. 2-inch wide straps went over her bare shoulders. The creamy fabric made a square line above her breast, suggesting a swell. The dress hugged torso and waist, then flared wide in a loose curving ruffle. It was printed with flowers starting at her navel, then trailing around the center to encircle the entire dress. To add a dash of folly, she wore her Fluvog lace-up combat boots. Oregon came to a halt like a rushing reel hitting a brick wall. In the silence, she surveyed her work. It had been a bad summer for Johnny. She consummated her betrayal at the quarry 3 days later. Gil took her in an exciting and rough way, spreading her out in a hayloft on her stomach. It had been wicked. She could still see the meadow, trees, and blue sky from the haymow as he took her, the feel of the raspy bales beneath her, the hot sun as it slashed in upon them. Johnny knew, without a word or an acknowledgement, somehow he had lost June. His sparkly eyes turned dark, his lovely mouth turned down. No matter how he tried, he couldn't stay away from her. His heart was lost to her and breaking. There was exquisite pain whenever he was with her. He pined helplessly when he was not. He just nearly owned her heart, he knew, but somehow she had slipped away. As June laughed and chatted through that summer, Johnny received a blow from which he would never fully recover. June winced slightly at the thought. She grabbed the ruffles of her hem and flounced back and forth like a cowgirl dancing. She had loved that boy, but Gil's sullen, commanding presence had spoken of deeper, darker things. Johnny's light heart appeared as whimsy by comparison. Though she never laughed at Johnny that summer, she had tasted his dark downfall and went to Gill to explore it. Down in there somewhere, she never forgave herself for breaking Johnny. So when she thought of memory itself and how it built who we were, she both cursed and adored that kind face. If she could erase him, she would be someone else completely. As a last resort, June regarded Alzheimer's with hope, a small comfort in the clarity of her mind and heart. She strapped the delicate watch to her slender wrist and looked at the time. Tetley would arrive within the hour. She went to the bright, cozy kitchen and set the table for 3. She donned a pretty full-length apron, tying a bow in the back. With a chef's knife, she began to cut fruit for salad. She was a tigress, constantly moist and on the hunt. She was a summer girl well used. Oh, my dear sweet boy,